Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another installment of our Community Voices series. And the 2025 series is focused on false versus just solutions. And we get a lot of questions about what we mean by a false solution. And so I just put the words on the screen for everybody. And really, this comes from Climate Justice Alliance and some of our national groups. There's a wonderful report called Hoodwinked in the Hothouse that when I read it so many years ago, it just illuminated really what the difference was and what we were really working for, right? And so when we are talking about false solutions, like our webinar back in February around line 5, it's ones that harm low income and marginalized communities and continue to phase in fossil fuel infrastructure while ignoring safer alternatives. And it's fun to talk about those false solutions, and we do that a lot here at MiCAN. But even better tonight is a just solution, right? We also are trying to offer the positive vision of the way forward. And so we really love to be able to talk through how we do that and highlight all the wonderful folks that are actually making that happen. So tonight we're going to hear a little bit about equity in local climate action plans and how that happens. I got just a couple brief Michigan Climate Action Network announcements. If you just bear with me for a couple of minutes, we'll get to our great lineup of speakers here tonight. So who are we? I hope most folks out there coming to this webinar know that our mission is to amplify, connect, and support. And if you don't know it out there, you are the majority. The vast majority of Michiganders not only believe in climate change, but they are concerned. Only a few folks are actually taking action, and that's our whole mission, is to connect you all, support you, and make it easy to take those actions together. And I put up the graphic of what is now our steering committee because in 2022, Michigan Climate Action Network wrote a report about all the communities in Michigan that were leading the way on climate. And it in part served as some of the basis for the researchers that we'll hear from a little bit later today. And really, my point here is to make sure you guys understand before federal investments, before state law, before the My Healthy Climate Plan in our state, it was local communities that were taking bold and equitable steps, passing climate emergency declarations, renewable energy standards, and writing climate action plans on their own. And these times, that's not going to change. I know that our communities out there have the resolve and are going to continue to do the right things in their local communities. And that's why we're here to support them. Those communities that were in that report, as I said, have now formed our grassroots steering committee so that we really rely on those groups around the state to talk to us about what is going on in their communities, what they need, what kind of issues should rise to the state level that we need to be working on. I bet you'll hear some of these cities and towns in some of the research. And for sure, we're going to be highlighting Grand Rapids Climate Coalition as they are working towards their climate action and adaptation plan tonight. Just a few initiatives. One, also the ways that we amplify all of our efforts. If you have an energy success story to tell, whether that's retrofitting your own house, your own faith community, your school, buying that EV, or hopefully your school got that electric bus, we want to hear about it. Maybe you've got a clean energy job. Maybe you lost a clean energy job recently. We want to know about that too, because we need to really tell the stories of the economic, the health benefits, the impact that the funding and some of those investments really makes on our communities. So we hope you'll share our energy transition stories with us. And thanks, Amanda, is throwing these links in the chat as we go. The other big thing that I want to share with you, I think many of you know that we work in part of large coalitions to shut down Line 5. Again, thinking about that as the epitome of a false solution. And we are engaged in the legal and regulatory front. We're about to launch, well, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is about to launch their public comment period at the federal level. We'll be asking you to engage in that process. Our Department of Energy, Great Lakes and Environment here in Michigan is also about to launch a public comment period. And Michigan Climate Action Network is taking the Michigan Public Service Commission all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court over their flawed decision to continue to approve the oil tunnel of Line 5. That's all a little heavy, so that's why you're looking at fish instead. So that's the hard work. The fun work was how could we engage an entire movement? And this is with Wisconsin Sierra Club, Minnesota 350, all the states that Line 5 hits. And we decided to fold some origami fish and try to break a world record while in the process. Fish have to be in by June 5th, folks. So if you're out there folding fish, please get them in the mail to our colleagues at Wisconsin Sierra Club. And we are nearing our goal. That total is from about a week ago. We're at just over 15,000 of the 18,000 plus fish we need. So keep folding, keep sending them away. And I would also love to be saying that we got a fish from all 50 states. And there are just 5 states that we haven't received one from. So I really hope if you know someone in Wyoming, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, or South Carolina, you get them to fold a fish and send it in to us. The Fish for the Future website, you can find instructions how to do this, how to lead a group, and where to mail all of those pieces. And finally, I think what we're best known for, we have the save the date out for our annual, it'll be our 6th annual, I kind of can't believe it, Michigan Climate Action Summit. We will be in Lansing on Tuesday, September 9th, and we are making this into a 2-day event this year. So be ready to stay over and do some Capitol Day activities with us the next day where we can really talk to our legislators and make sure that our voices get heard. And I think with that, I am going to turn this over to our speakers here tonight. We've got a really wonderful lineup. First, a couple of our academic researchers, Elena Lioubimtseva, who many of you know from Grand Valley State University, will talk about her research on this particular issue. And I had the privilege of, I think, connecting Elena and Graham Diedrich, who also was researching this similar topic. And that's part of our mission is to connect these folks. So we'll get to hear about their research pieces from that. And then Nate and Wesley, Grand Rapids, going to talk to us about where we're at with that climate action and adaptation plan. But first up, Dr. Lioubimtseva, you are an amazing human. We have known each other for a long time. She also leads the Climate Change Education Solutions Network at Grand Valley State University, which hosts a conference every fall that we are always a big part of. And so, Elena, I'm going to let you just take this away. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Amanda, for inviting me. So let me quickly share my slides and we will go from there. And just a moment. I think it's still loading. So let's just try again. Here we go. Can you guys see my slides or it's still slow? Oh, it's still loading.
We see them. It's not in present. There you go. Looks great.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, well, a part of the study that I'm going to share today was conducted by 2 cohorts of my students, and they're all co-authors on this study. So I have a great pleasure to introduce all my co-authors, Catherine Karen, Caitlin Pointer, Bushra Mohammed, Amber Rush, and Hannah Zillman. Unfortunately, they couldn't join me today. They all have graduated by now since we have published this study in sustainability, and they all have moved in different directions from Grand Valley. But what was wonderful that I had an opportunity to work with these 2 cohorts. So I was working for 1 year with Katrine and Hannah, and 1 year with Caitlin and Bushra, and they were my Russell Mobby Fellows. And the Russell Mobby Fellowship is a program that is available through Johnson Center for Philanthropy, which is located in Grand Rapids. And so our goal was really to understand and gain a better understanding of what are the needs of their local governments and communities in addressing equity and inclusion in climate action and climate adaptation plans, and provide recommendations for philanthropy community. And I would say that even since 2024, when we published the study till now, the funding landscape, as you all know, has changed already. So I would say that the recommendations that we gave to philanthropic community in 2024 definitely would be different today because the study was collected at the time of the previous administration. But when we started this study, we really were motivated by understanding the background of climate action and climate adaptation planning landscape, both in Michigan and nationwide. And probably many of you are very familiar with very fragmented landscape in the United States in general. Climate action and adaptation planning in general in the United States is very much driven bottom up. Sometimes it can be, I would say, sparkled by the development at the federal level or state level. Some of you might remember that after the previous Michigan Climate Action Plan at the state level, like in 2009, there was a number of cities that were interested to develop their climate action plans, and they started popping up, like the first one in Traverse City in 2011, and then a few in 2012, and a few in 2013, and then the trend slowed down. And then when we were writing this paper, the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan was just released in 2022. And so we felt that that's a good time to see what is the experience of the existing climate action plan, because we were expecting that there will be another handful of Michigan cities that would be inspired by the state policies, and they will jump into action one more time, and they will be able to learn from their peers. But we clearly, saw this multitude of different approaches, different frameworks. They're very often very incoherent. Cities are not necessarily learning from each other. There is very few opportunities still for peer learning, and lots of lack of comparability. And other studies definitely have very similar findings. We also felt that communities have very own ideas about what equity and what inclusion and what justice really means. There are no single definition. There is no single framework that will be adapted at the state level. And this is really not unique to Michigan. Almost every single state in the United States is really navigating these issues very much, in this bottom up fashion. It's very different from the experience of some other countries. Like I have some experience of studying climate action and adaptation plan in France, and it's very streamlined and it's very top down, the same in Japan. I just came back from Bhutan and also learned that it's also very streamlined and very planned in Bhutan, but of course it's a very small country. And so our main research question for my students was really how are equity concerns reflected in the existing and developing climate action and adaptation plan, and how they're related to diversity of stakeholders. And we purposefully wanted to include both climate action and climate adaptation plan. So sometimes they're together. For example, Grand Rapids has climate action and climate adaptation plan. We could not include it, unfortunately, even though we observed the process of development of Grand Rapids Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, but it was not published at the time, and it's still, I'm sure that we will hear more today from the insiders of this process, so we only were able to approach it through the interview. But some cities only have climate action plans, some cities have climate adaptation plans, and some cities have both. And our objective was to understand how considerations of equity in climate action and adaptation plans really can be measured and evaluated, how we can evaluate diversity, and how we can really find perhaps some patterns between the way how equity is addressed in climate adaptation plans and how it is related to inclusion and diversity of different groups of stakeholders. So this study is not comprehensive. Our goal was not to include every single climate action adaptation plan. We were much more aiming for geographic diversity. We wanted to have fairly comprehensive geographic coverage of different climate impacts and different issues, and really very full coverage of geography from Marquette to Ann Arbor and from Traverse City to Royal Oak. One of the reasons why we excluded some cities, for example, you wouldn't see here the plan of Ypsilanti, even the city Ypsilanti has climate action plan because it's very close to Ann Arbor and it's very close to Detroit. And the plan was very similar to the previous plan of Ann Arbor, published in 2012. And since that time, Ann Arbor already published the next plan in 2020. So we really were going not after including every single plan available in Michigan, but looking at diversity of different approaches. So in this table, you can clearly see both combined action and adaptation plans, only action plans that are basically mitigation plans, and climate adaptation plans that maybe mention climate change mitigation, but really primarily are focusing on adaptation. What was important for us is to understand who is included in the decisions, in the development of climate action or adaptation plan, who is making those decisions, and how these decisions are leading to integration of equity concerns in various measures proposed in climate action plans. We used both surveys and interviews. In fact, in our first year, we were hoping only to limit the study by the survey, and the survey response was fairly low. So then we decided in the second year to expand the study to the interview. And this is a 2-year study, so we had every year a team of 2 students. They were trained. We developed a rubric for evaluation of equity and diversity, which is based on my much broader study that I tested both in France and in the United States. I have another study focusing essentially on all climate adaptation plans, only adaptation plans of small cities in the United States. And so we took this methodology and then my students tweaked it. We wanted to make it more adapted and more relevant to Michigan. We have changed some of those planning domains. We have added some new, but essentially we wanted to see how equity is addressed in all these 14 domains across different sectors in existing climate adaptation plans. So it could be emergency management, housing security, food security, and so on. And we wanted to see how they play in those different cities. And then we also had a rubric to evaluate how various groups of stakeholders were involved. So this is where diversity and inclusion come. And so I specifically wanted to clarify that we were not measuring in any way demographic or socioeconomic diversity of based on particular individuals who were involved in the planning process. Instead, we were aiming to evaluate what organizations, what types of stakeholders. So we were really looking at the types of stakeholders who were involved in the decision-making and what role they played. So that would be various associations of minority groups, social justice advocacy group, environmental advocacy groups, K-12, universities, and so on. That's our understanding of diversity and inclusion. And so, as I said, in the first year, we conducted the funding survey to understand how climate action and adaptation plans were actually funded, if their funding came from private sources or state or other local public sources or federal funds. And as you can see, the response is fairly low. So then in the second year, we also pushed into the interviews. And Denise, I remember yours actually, even though we usually don't disclose who participated in the interviews, but I know that yours one of our respondents. And so thank you so much to you. So from each city, we aim to interview one person involved in the planning process from the authority position. So that could be something involved in the city planning department or whoever else was leading this process. And the other person who was involved more from one of the community organizations who were participating in the process. We wanted to have this both perspective both from the city government and from one of their groups who was engaged in the planning process as well. And essentially, based on this evaluation, we were able to see the signature of climate action adaptation planning of each city. So what you see on the left side of my screen are the equity-centered centered actions. And on the right side, you see evaluation of diversity and inclusion, representation of different sectors. So here is Ann Arbor, and then Detroit, and then East Lansing, and those are just some examples: Marquette, Royal Oak, Traverse City. Traverse City had both climate action and then climate adaptation studies, so we evaluated two different documents. And we can go back to them later if we have time, but I just wanted to kind of give you a glimpse of our approach. And so what we found is, first of all, lots of disparity in terms of equity consideration, equity-centered actions addressed by different cities. The way how we computed those equity-centered actions, there's essentially like big computation formula behind that you can probably guess from all those graphs. We had a rubric evaluating the degree of how equity was evaluated, and then it was multiplied by all the sectors. For each sector, there was like 4 different options, 4 different ratings, and then it was all computed and recalculated based in the percentages. So what is important, really, what we see here, that Ann Arbor clearly emerges as a leader in Michigan, both in terms of equity-centered actions and in terms of diversity and inclusion in that climate action plan. So the A20 that was published in 2022, I believe, is really very strong plan in both ways. And we had a number of interviews, both with city planners and with various groups who were involved. So there is some substance behind those numbers. And then in terms of equity and inclusion, we can clearly see, again, that Detroit and Ann Arbor are leading the cohort of cities that we had a chance to evaluate, and then all other cities are kind of between 20 and 30%, having fairly low ratings. And in our study, we also had a kind of the parallel line of research on tribal initiatives on climate action and adaptation, and some recommendations of cities could learn from the tribes. I would not talk about it today, just in the interest of time, because we're only focusing on the cities. But one kind of hopeful finding that emerged from our research, we found that there is definitely some improvement. So what we see here is the development of these plans. The first one, the plan by Traverse City, was published in 2011. The last one was with an outlier by Royal Oak, but overall, we see this trend of improvement. So this is a good thing. And we clearly see that attention to diversity, diversity of and the inclusion of stakeholders has been growing. There's almost linear trend of growth with time, and inclusion of diverse groups of stakeholders and attention to equity is definitely growing as well. As you can see, we could not include Grand Rapids quantitatively. We did not evaluate the plan quantitatively. It was scheduled at the time of our work for publication in 2024, so we only limited our study by the interviews. So those are our findings. You can find more findings if you read our paper. Thank you very much for sharing our paper. It's published in Sustainability. Those are really the key ideas. We see that there's a wide range of different approaches, lack of coordination, lack of peer learning, many different guidelines. There are really no diversity, equity, and inclusion standards in Michigan for cities in general. And this is understandable that there are many gaps in addressing equity in many sectors. And it's probably natural that different cities give priority to different areas. But as I said, what is very positive is that we see the improvement over time. So this is something that we can definitely see as a very positive trend. There's clearly a need for cities for more peer learning, and maybe groups like this could actually provide some opportunities for cities to learn from each other's. Cities definitely need, we heard again and again, even at the time of very abundant funding available for climate action and adaptation planning. We did this paper in 2023 and published it in 2024. We clearly still saw that there was a huge need for dedicated trained staff and really need for more communication and more coordination and more meaningful community engagement. And so I'm very interested also to hear today from our friends from Grand Rapids, because we saw that Grand Rapids was really standing out compared to so many cities because of the ambassadors initiative. And we felt so bad that we could not quantify the data, but we saw that that would be really a way to go for every single city in Michigan. And this is my last slide, and the rest
Thanks
is
so much, Elena. Yep. If we have, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. A lot of different thoughts have come up, and that's why we have that steering committee, so they can learn from each other. And that's exactly what we do in those pieces. I think let's just go ahead and turn it over to Graham here. If you have a question, throw it in the chat, and maybe after Graham gets done, we'll ask the research questions, and we'll see how we're doing on time. Did you have slides, Graham? Did you want to go ahead and share those?
I do. I will share those now. And thank you so much for sharing. It was really great to see. Okay, wait. I think I may be sharing the wrong screen. Let's see here. There we go. Can everyone see my screen okay?
It's great.
Perfect. Well, hi everybody. I'm excited to have a conversation with you all. I'm Graham. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Political Science at the University of Michigan. I know the intro slide said Michigan State, but I just graduated there like 3 weeks ago or so. So it's going to be interesting calling myself a Wolverine and not a Spartan. But there you go. And yeah, my paper similarly focuses on equity and climate action plans in Michigan. And I wanted to kind of start out this conversation today by asking all of us to sort of consider what is a climate action plan. Like, I'm assuming that there's folks in this room that have read a plan and maybe have an idea about what a plan is. And I'd love to hear your thoughts either in the chat or by unmuting your microphone. Just what is a climate action plan, just to get the conversation started.
Don't be shy. You can unmute if you want.
If no one has any ideas, I definitely do. I've been thinking about this a lot. Um,
So do you want us to verbalize or
yeah,
without
Jump
that?
for
in.
sure. Yeah.
So definitely a set of goals and objectives and implementation ideas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Joshua says municipality-based plan for sustainability. Denise says dedicated commitment to goals. Yeah. Nate says coordinated intentions towards the future for people and in a place. Yeah.
Opportunity assessment and needs
Opportunity
assessment
assessment.
and needs
Yeah.
assessment. Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah, Ruth, I really like how you point that out. That connects to some of my research where a large focus or maybe a gap of climate action plans as they currently exist is the needs assessment, the analysis. Like, are we rooting this plan in a local context of the needs of climate adaptation and mitigation for this particular locality rather than just the generalized context of the climate crisis more generally? So yeah, thanks everybody. That's generally my thinking on it as well. They're generally strategic documents that are developed by governments at different levels, generally local and state, and they focus on a wide variety of goals like cutting greenhouse gas emissions, preparing for climate impacts, setting those measurable goals and timelines, as Denise mentions, also, Elena really presented this really beautifully. Engaging communities and stakeholders in climate solutions is a really important part of that as well. So the purpose of climate action plans is to guide this action around some of those criteria that Elena mentioned previously. So water, air, emissions, green spaces, etc. The goals are generally reducing greenhouse gas emissions, adaptation, mitigation, the spread of climate action plans, just to sort of zoom out of Michigan and look more generally at the United States. There's various numbers, but the one that I found that was most prevalent was around 400 US cities and counties have climate action plans, and there's around 32 states that have these plans. So they're growing in number, and there's various levels of ability of states and cities to update these plans. So some of them, they come in waves. So there's some from the early 2010s, and then they never updated them. And then there's plans that continuously get updated on a 2 or 5 year basis. So there's a relatively large geographical spread. Um, this sort of really emphasizes the local role that municipal governments play in planning, zoning, and infrastructure. And this really highlights in the US, the significance of environmental federalism, where there is this necessary cooperation between the federal, state, and local levels of government to create a holistic approach to climate change work. So this was really the motivation behind my interest in climate action plans, specifically in Michigan. And as I was reading through the existing literature, I really saw that there was not a large gap. There was not a large focus on the equity and environmental justice components of climate resilience. There was a lot of focus on the traditional measures like ensuring that greenhouse gas emissions are being reduced, ensuring that we're responding to storms and increased flood threats and those sorts of things. But there wasn't a real focus on procedural and distributive justice issues. So that was really the main motivation behind my study. A quick overview of just what the study area was. I had a different definition than Elena, which kind of explains that there's a difference here in the geographical scope. For the purposes of my study, I didn't actually in the article publish uh, where I was looking. I just provided this map just to keep it a little bit anonymous. But you can kind of get a general geographical idea if you're looking at the map here and you're from Michigan. So we did look at similar plans, but that's generally the study area. There were 9 cities with plans included in the study. Really, what I did was I looked at traditional outcome criterias, like when you're producing a plan, what outcome are you eventually hoping to achieve? And it was sort of looking at a variety of different topics from water, air, energy, transportation, weather, ecosystem, solid waste, some of the what I call sort of traditional measures of resilience that most plans will focus on. And then I included specifically an environmental justice topic, not saying that these other areas don't have environmental justice or equity components themselves, as Elena kind of points to, but trying to focus on the community involvement and looking at equitable distribution of benefits and cost across all of these areas was the main focus in proposing this evaluatory framework. With the evaluation, it sort of consisted of 2 general categories. The first category being the overall progress of a plan. And I sort of used this framework called awareness, analysis, and action to look at how the plan structures its its kind of pathway towards action. So first, before you can act on a problem, you generally have to be aware of it. So awareness is defined as acknowledging the causes and consequences of climate change. Does the plan do that according to the outcome criteria listed? Like, does the plan acknowledge that water and air are going to be a problem? And is environmental justice something that we're even considering? Like, does the plan mention equity? Then typically after we've identified a problem, we need to find a way to think about it and quantify it. and be able to produce information about it, whether that's conducting a greenhouse gas inventory or building stories and narratives around those problems. So analysis is focused on integrating and synthesizing relevant information. Does the plan do that? Does it bring together both general knowledge, maybe at a federal or global level, with local information? Like Ruth pointed out, needs assessments, housing inventory, looking at walkability. Does the plan do that or not? Action is the final step, which is looking at, okay, here's an acknowledgement and the data. How does the plan seek to create change around that understanding? So that's the first evaluation category. The second evaluation category is plan quality. And this is a little bit dense here, but I'll just quickly summarize. So with plan quality, it's focused on the ability of the plan to sort of serve as a guiding document. So it's not just something that ends up sitting on a shelf. Like these are criteria that focus on, is this thing actionable? So with the plan quality components, it's focused on, does it have an information base? Is there a variety of goals and objectives outlined for folks to act upon? Are there options and different priorities? Like, is there maybe one goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Maybe one option is to invest in community solar. Maybe the other is to focus on an energy efficiency program. So, sort of multiple layers beyond one sort of overall objective. And then the last one is really crucial, the implementation piece. Like, have you identified where you're hoping to receive this funding to do this thing from? Which department is going to be working on this? Which unit will be collaborating? Is this a cross-governmental approach that you're designing? So those are the categories that I've sort of encountered for my framework. This sort of shows how I applied that framework into action. So with that outcome criteria, back to those outcome criteria I mentioned previously, like what do we want out of this plan? This outcome criteria is improved access to sustainable transportation. You kind of see that a lot with these plans. This is then applied to a municipal plan. We're looking at this one section here, looking at transportation infrastructure. We see that it outlines the feasibility, the city's role, and the potential timeline and cost. So then I go to my evaluation metric, which is implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, and I say, okay, I'm going to score that as a 3 because it's localized. It's telling us about the particularities of the city. However, it's still largely descriptive. It's using, for instance, dollar signs rather than actual estimated amounts. So that's why it might not receive the full score of a 4, but it receives a 3 because it's localized. It may not just have the estimated amounts and, for instance, the dollar amounts for the funding there. So that's kind of an example of the coding system put into practice. For the results here, I just kind of have some key takeaways. I do have some slides with figures, but I figured we just, for the sake of time, could just go through some bullets here. And my results are sort of in line with Elena's, which is generally these plans focus little on analysis. They have a small information base as well. So there's a lot of awareness, like saying environmental justice is an issue and equity is important, but there's not a huge focus on how are we analyzing the conditions of equity? Like how are we looking at, for instance, like walkability and housing in this context? There's also many plans that just don't mention environmental justice or equity at all. And this is sort of, again, with some of the earlier plans that were produced in the early 2010s. There's not really a huge focus on equity. And you can kind of see this division between the earlier plans and the plans that have come out more recently, where the plans now sort of view themselves as like a more holistic document that focuses on community engagement, whereas the previous plans just focused on some of those traditional measures, like are we ensuring resilience in our infrastructure primarily. The final piece here is generalized global climate impacts were generally more prevalent than specified local data. An example of specified local data is shown here on the right side of the screen with the Kalamazoo City Plan. And you can see here they have like an analysis of walkability in their city, which is really useful from a implementation perspective because now when you're looking back at this document, you don't have to wonder how walkability applies to your city. You have it right there in the document. So that is a really great thing you'd like to see. Um, Again, a lack of meaningful environmental justice analysis and action. Generally, it goes to the acknowledgement stage and then sort of peters off after that. And overall, procedural and distributed justice ranked among the lowest of the outcome criteria that I looked at. A lot of the traditional measures like greenhouse gas emissions reductions, improving air quality and energy efficiency were sort of the ones which were more prioritized. And just some final thoughts here. Moving forward, boosting resources to extend the focus beyond generalized data. This one bullet point is pretty hard to achieve, given like funding constraints and staffing constraints, which is why I leave some helpful resources on the right side of the screen, which is the My Green Communities and Catalyst Communities groups. They offer webinars and trainings, and the Catalyst Communities actually offers fellowships, which is awesome. I was a fellow once, and it was a really great experience both for myself and the community I was working with. The My Funding Hub shows different grants and funding opportunities, and then City Climate Planner offers a lot of great resources and technical support on how you can develop a climate action plan in your own community. Also, it's significant that a lot of these plans, and I know Elena sort of focuses on the actual development of them from a community engaged perspective. But at least from my understanding of reading these plans, it felt like there was a lot of siloing, where maybe one group of people, one department that was deemed the sustainability or the environmental department focused on it, and there wasn't a huge cross-government collaboration. So making sure that that is an approach taken in the future, I think can sort of help with the implementation and also the integration of environmental justice principles. Uh, Centering communities, community working groups, surveys, interviews. The community is there, like Denise said, the community is interested and wants to get engaged and is supportive of these measures. They're there and they're your greatest asset. And again, cross-jurisdictional learning and collaboration with these peer-to-peer networks is so crucial. And that's what I have today. Thank you all so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out in the chat. There's my email. Yeah.
Great. Great job, Graham. I'm glad
Thank you.
you got a master's and you're going on for your PhD to
Yeah.
continue this amazing, amazing work for our state.
Yeah.
Indeed, those communities aren't just helpful, they're often the ones pushing their governments
Yeah.
to that change, as we know. I think let's just keep putting questions in the chat for everyone. We're a couple minutes behind. Gonna be all right, buddy, but I want to give the full 15 to Nate and Wesley here to tell us, let's put this into action now, right? We've heard some of the research and the big picture about climate action planning in our state. There's a lot going on. Grand Rapids, you have been in the thick of all of this action and are trying to pass your climate action and adaptation plan. Nate, Wesley, please let us know what's going on in Grand Rapids and hopefully how we can help you.
Well, cool. Well, I'll just go first. My name is Wesley Watson. I'm a part of the Grand Rapids Climate Coalition, and I'm a member of the Grand Rapids Community Collaboration on Climate Change. And I'll let Nate introduce himself as well.
Okay, real quick. Good to be with you all. Nate Raubiri. I'm also with the Grand Rapids Climate Coalition as a co-chair there, and honored to work with Wesley in a number of contexts.
It's been amazing listening to hear all the speakers as well, listening and hearing different perspectives. When we talk about the Grand Rapids CAP plan, the Grand Rapids Climate Adaptation Plan, listening to the last speaker, it is very interesting because the City of Grand Rapids Climate Adaptation Plan was centered around community and was formed around community. And it was actually created through different initiatives through the City of Grand Rapids. The City of Grand Rapids have different plans, particularly through their strategic plan and their master plan. And throughout the planning and throughout the stage plans of the master plan, strategic plan, the CAP was kind of formed and created as well. And also in 2021, the fall of 2021, City Manager Mark Washington and the city adopted amendment as well to kind of focus in on reducing the city's greenhouse gas emission as well. And within the city's focus of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, the planning of creating a climate adaptation plan was kind of in the motion and in the creation. And so the plan was a collaboration between the Grand Rapids Community Collaboration on Climate Change and the Office of Sustainability through the City of Grand Rapids and other community key stakeholder groups, along with different other key community organizations and other city departments as well. I just want to also shout out our other co-chair with the Grand Rapids Climate Coalition, Janet Zahn. She's also a leadership team director and a part of the Grand Rapids Community Collaboration on Climate Change as well, and also has been a key part within the CAP process as well. I just want to talk about the six key sectors and the six key priorities of the Grand Rapids Climate Adaptation Plan. The six key sectors of the plan is energy systems, residential homes, building and industry, transportation, natural-based solutions, and food systems. From a community and C4 perspective of the community plan. And so I'm going to speak a little bit about the community portion and how we got the input from the community and where community played their role with creating the climate adaptation plan. Grand Rapids C4 community ambassadors. Within Grand Rapids C4, we have leadership team directors, and we also have community ambassadors as well. Those community ambassadors act as our key ambassadors going out in the community, pushing and educating the community in the city of Grand Rapids when it comes to the most vulnerable frontline community members, when it comes to educating them around key issues that impacts them, educating them about the climate crisis, educating them about key issues within the city when it comes to how can we reduce the barriers when it comes to environmental justice issues that's happening in our city. And so those key community ambassadors went out in the community along with the City of Grand Rapids, along with the Office of Sustainability and other key stakeholder groups. We created workshops. We met the people in the community. We'd have canvassing efforts where we had community ambassadors went in different neighborhoods, canvassing efforts, talking to them about the CAP, talking to them about environmental issues, educating them about environmental issues, what environmental issues and climate crisis issues that impacts them, what do they think about a just future as well. And within those, as we talk about the CAP plan, one of the things we also did was we created a climate risk and vulnerability assessment as well. That climate risk and vulnerability assessment, we focused on hosting focus groups with our immigrant community and unhoused and youth and also seniors in the city of Grand Rapids as well on getting their perspective of what does a just future is on also when it comes to an environmental standpoint and also when it comes to a climate justice and also a climate injustice standpoint, what can we do in our community to make sure that the city is doing everything we can to fight for their environmental needs and fight for a just and climate future as well. Overview of how we got to this moment. So how we got to this moment, I talked about how I'm kind of jumping everywhere a little bit. Sorry, Nate. How we got to this moment. how we got here is within the planning stages. I talked a little bit about through the master plan and also the City of Grand Rapids strategic plan and the creation of the climate adaptation plan. What within that creation, within 2022, we started the pre-planning phase of the climate adaptation plan. And so how we're going to do this, we start planning, assessing what's how we're going to do this, bringing our stakeholders, having community meetings with our key environmental justice community leaders, creating and also coming in with city officials as well on how we're also going to solve and work with and reach the most vulnerable communities that's also impacted as well. So we had that pre-planning phase as well. Once we had that pre-planning phase in 2022, we had our launch. And so we had our launch in March of 2023. And so we had a launch party. That launch party was a big success. And then we also launched our community online survey process as well. Then once we launched our community online survey process, we was able to reach out to community members. We was able to go out and table at community events, able to go out and table at different faith-based organizations, able to table at community rallies, able to table throughout all of the community, asking and making sure we're getting that data and getting that feedback from community members around what we want to see, what they want to see when it comes to this climate adaptation plan. What does a just future looks like for them? What does a just future in Grand Rapids look like? What do they want to see when it comes to their community looks like? Within that planning phase, we also created climate advisory teams as well, where not only community stakeholder groups, but also community members had an opportunity to join these community advisory teams as well and participate within these community advisory teams. Throughout 2024, we start hosting community focus groups and workshops and one-on-ones, and we start hosting different canvassing efforts, tabling events. We start hosting tabling events at Juneteenth festivals. We start hosting different events at different concerts as well. We start hosting tabling events at different Pride festivals. Any festival in Grand Rapids, we were there. We were there getting feedback because we want to hear from residents. We want to hear from different community members. We was at different neighborhood summits. We met people where they're at because we want this to be a community effort. We wanted community to be at the table when it comes to this climate adaptation plan, where we're currently at right now. So we have gathered that feedback all of last year. We gathered that feedback. We were in the planning and development stage earlier this year. We were in the feedback and drafting stage earlier this year. Now we're in that drafting stage. Now we have submitted that draft stage to the city commissioners and the mayor as well, and the city manager. I just want to recap before I hand it over to Nate, real quick recap within the community meetings, the feedback that we got from community residents within those community surveys and also from those community focus groups and meetings. A just climate future looks like affordable and access to resources and for resiliency and preparedness. Another community feedback that we heard from members was resiliency practice such as trees and native plants and local food systems. Another feedback we got when it comes to what does climate future looks like is mental health support and community aid. Another feedback is a desire for mass transportation was expressed in more responses than any other subject as well when it came to feedback from community members. Another feedback when it comes to a climate future, what a climate future in Grand Rapids also looks like is increasing access to clean, renewable energy and lowering utility bills. Another response was many of the responders we referred to as future. Many responders referred to a future where people do not want a choice to choose between paying for utilities or paying for necessarily resources like food or education. They want a strong use for that energy and clean grid. And so another key thing that we also heard is that we want com we want input where community is going to be able to hear, and community is also going to see transparency from the city of Grand Rapids when it comes to the implementation phase of this plan as well. And so from the total workshops and focus groups, we have talked to over 1,800 community residents as well. So from a community standpoint, that's kind of where we did our community research so far. And I'll kick it over to Nate.
Thanks, Wesley. Yeah, I just want to underscore just how deeply community was involved at every step of the process. And spoiler alert, we wish that the city commission had not had taken that more seriously and maybe not overlooked it in its recent actions. So coming from the Grand Rapids Climate Coalition, along with Wesley, we've been kind of engaged in this process since 2021 and really played more of an outside game of like trying to push this process forward. And actually, we're glad to see it in 2021 or 2022. In fact, the city did set a 62.8% science-based target of 62.8% reduction from 2019 levels to 2030. And so naturally then what you need is a plan to how you're going to achieve that. We are glad there was an ambitious, well, could have been more, but we're glad that there was an equity-based target, but it needed a plan. And that's what the CAP has been trying to address. I'd encourage y'all to read it. As Wesley noted, there are 6 chapters. It's online. It's still really good. Um, um, there were 197 actions included in it. Jumping ahead, unfortunately, right now the city commission is talking about a possible 20-ish that they would like to hold up that the city can achieve, and we'll get into some of that. We don't have much time, but we'll do that. Anyway, it's a big cut. You can see that there was a whole framework and a lot of thinking, careful thinking behind what was included in the cap. This is, you can see the last year, obviously it goes back years and years and years. We were hoping that in May it would be finalized and adopted. Now we're looking at July, and we're not quite sure what the contents of that is going to be. So where did we get off track? I'll start and I'll kick it over to Wesley. This was a bit of a surprise. I think a lot of people in the community, in the Grand Rapids climate community and the climate justice movement, very much thought that this was going to pass, based on how much community input there'd been the whole way, and that we had some champions in the commission. In fact, we had an environmental mayor. We Wesley might have some views on this as well. I know he does. One of the main takeaways, I think, is that the mayor was very leery to commit us to a large framework that didn't have very concrete things that the city would be on the hook to do. So I think his preference is to whittle it down to a short list of items that the city can be on the hook for, and that the city is willing to take the fall for getting done or not getting done, and very much wasn't looking at it as a community-wide plan, and very much didn't consider the kind of the equity implications of that kind of a move. That's my read. There are a couple of other things, of course, as well, some dynamics we see in climate planning in general. But Wesley, what else do you see? Where did this go off track?
Yeah, I also just like to state, I know we're short on time here, that, this plan started, it started a while ago. I know Denise mentioned that locally, climate action have started way before actions at the federal level. And so since then, we have been through 3 city commissions, like elections. We have been through a mayor election. We have been through 2 sustainability directors. A lot of those things are issues due to term limits. When it comes to mayors, city commissions, vacancies, retirements, and different things like that. And then, we also have opposition. Let's keep it real. We have people that don't want to see bold climate action happen. We have opposition from, the business community. We have opposition from our local Chamber of Commerce as well, that doesn't want to see some of the bold climate action happening that might disrupt some of the big development, projects that's happening here within the city of Grand Rapids areas. We also have, misinformation as well from our local realtor associations and saying that, bold climate action will also have a massive impact to affordable housing issues that's happening here locally in the Grand Rapids area. And so a lot of those things is misinformation that we're seeing that we have to work with our local government, our city commissioners and our mayor on that misinformation that we're seeing, that we're getting from our opposition. And that opposition is heavy, and that opposition also has money behind them as well to counter our efforts. And so when it comes to the pushback and where we got off course, it just means that we as a community have to come out even stronger to voice support for this action. And we have seen community come back stronger and stronger in support for the climate adaptation plan.
Yeah, thanks, Wesley. We know we're at time, but the long story short is this ain't over. People are ready to dig in and keep working on this. When it's all said and done, or when we know a next action to mobilize on, we definitely want to share that out with the MiCAN community, and appreciate all your support to date. That's kind of it. And also when it's all said and done, I think Graham and Elena and us need to all connect, and we can write a mega case study. It sounds like there's a lot of material.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Wesley Nate, for giving us the background there and bringing us up to speed there. That's why we wanted to have a real live example here of how this work actually gets done. I saw Graham. I know, folks, if you got to go, you got to go, but I'm willing to stay online another 5 minutes or whatever it takes to get some good questions in here for our speakers tonight. Graham had to run off and go see Hamilton of all things, but he threw a question in the chat before he did for Wesley and Nate. I don't know how are the ambassadors chosen in that process?
Yeah, yeah, the community ambassadors for C4 was chosen. Um, C4 is an organization that was kind of, birthed also through the city of Grand Rapids, as a pilot program through the WEGI Foundation as well, and a couple of different other stakeholder organizations, which is now in the process of becoming our own entity. Well, we're officially our own entity now. And so within that process, C4, within its mission, that 60% of leadership team directors and ambassadors have to come from frontline community members and have to be represented from those frontline community members. And so we had an application process where we had community ambassadors from all three wards, community residents from all three wards of Grand Rapids applied to become community ambassadors. And we went through an interview process with those community ambassadors. And we have all community ambassadors from all different backgrounds, from our, immigration, from our immigrant community, from our unhoused community, to our disability community, to our senior community, to our youth. And so we have ambassadors from our tribal community as well. And so we have ambassadors from all different backgrounds that's there and represented it throughout the whole process.
I'm wondering, since Elena presented on the different kind of funding sources, and that always seems to be the rub, right? When we start talking about our climate action plans, and so much of the work And the research that I was involved in too, it always comes down to staffing and budgets, right? And so, Elena, you really showed, the difference between the federal, the state, the city, and you're going to get to study Grand Rapids at some point. If we have anything to say about it, we're going to get that thing done. Wesley, Nate, do you know where that's really coming, where any of the funding pieces were coming from, or how do you respond to some of the opposition saying, well, we can't afford this, right? Is usually what the opposition says. So.
Yeah, the within the total within the cap plan, it has it's about 98 pages long. Within the cap plan, it has like the planning, implementation, and the funding, like funding sources and different priorities for the city to do. And some of those are just like local things that the city can do, far as investing locally into our local food systems, less investing locally into our local farm community as well to support our local food systems and grow. And also when it comes to our parks and recs, when it comes to create more tree canopy, when it comes to growing more green access and as well. Um, the city commission have allocated different funding sources prior, a couple years ago, when it comes to more walkability and different other things. And currently with our current city commission and mayor, they are all in favor for more walkability and more creating Grand Rapids when it comes to reducing the amount of transportation pollution that we see in our city and creating more bike lanes as well.
I want to chime in, and based on my experience of reviewing many, many climate action and adaptation plans of cities of comparable size across the country. I would say that Grand Rapids has by far the most sophisticated, the most well thought through, the most logical, the most inclusive framework. And I really, really hope that it will go forward. And I'm not saying it because I love Grand Rapids and I live here, but it's really probably the best model that would be then hopefully expanded and applied in many areas. What I also found very interesting in terms of funding, that it's a very rare example of very well thought through, very collaborative public and private funding combined, right? Lots of funding that came from local foundations, philanthropic foundations, and also from grants. And I think that that's really the way to go. We see so many climate action and adaptation initiatives that kind of spike and then don't go through because the funding is over. And usually that happens with grants, right? We all are well too familiar with initiatives that end when the grant ends. And I think that's definitely not the case of Grand Rapids because there is lots of philanthropic money that is coming from inside the city and is, I think it's very wisely used by the community. And again, this is just my impression as an observer, and Wesley and Nate, you really have the insider's views.
There you go. We got an endorsement from the research side. That was going to be I think the next step, Elena, is to match up the equity criteria and those pieces with what Grand Rapids is doing. Thanks everybody for hanging out for a little longer. Any last questions or any pieces while we've got you here?
There is one other question in the chat for Wesley and Nate about if anything has been written, if you guys have written anything up about how you've been dealing with that pushback. And if you have, share it with me, and I'd be more than happy to share it on our False v Just page where this recording will be.
Yeah, we as a coalition, we will have more information coming forth on how to deal with that pushback within the coming weeks and months ahead. The City of Grand Rapids Commission have agreed to table the vote on the climate adaptation plan until after the budget process for the City of Grand Rapids is completed. And so we're envisioning, as Nate said, around like July time where potentially where the vote should happen. And as that time happens, um, around that time, we should have an action, something around that time that we can share with you all.
Yeah. And I'll just add, we have been having extensive meetings with our commissioners as well as the mayor, trying to talk, trying to counter some of those points, especially around how housing and affordability and climate justice are not in opposition to one another, obviously. So been trying to attack some of those talking points with a more positive.
That's right. And thanks so much for your note in the chat too. One of my rebuttals to that is always the impacts are going to cost you more, city. And so when you're thinking about the flooding and the resilience centers and everything else that we're going to need to come back, we can pay you now or pay you later is always how that works, right? Well, thank you all so much for spending a little time with us on this Wednesday spring, maybe fall-like evening here as we talk about climate. It's really, really important for our communities to be engaged in that place-based work. And so getting to hear the sort of overview of how this happens and really what's important from the larger standpoint, and then having our Grand Rapids example, despite where you are now, it's wins along the way. You wrote a plan. You had sustainability directors that have been involved in this. You've had budgets. One hiccup here, we're not going to let that be the end of the story here in Grand Rapids. And we got a great testifier here on some of our academic research to hopefully come help and support the value and how great the plan that you've been creating. 1,800 folks over many years. Let's listen to the people who know their city and know what they need to do, right? I really appreciate all you guys being here tonight. Hi, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice.
Okay.
Bye.